I don't really watch these shows, but last week Cruz was on Late Night with Seth Meyers, TV, the one that follows Jimmy Fallon's show.
Yeah.
And he said this about climate change. I just came back from New Hampshire where there's snow and ice everywhere, and my view is simple. Debates on this should follow science and should follow data. And many of the alarmists on global warming, they've got a problem because the science doesn't back them up. This was Jerry Brown's response to Ted Cruz and climate change. Now clip one.
Over 90% of the scientists who deal with climate are absolutely convinced that the human activity, the industrial activity, the generation of CO2, methane, oxides of nitrogen, all the rest of those greenhouse gases are building up in the atmosphere. They're heat trapping, and they're causing not just warm drought in California, but severe storms and cold in the East Coast. So it's climate disruption of many different kinds. And that man betokens such a level of ignorance and a direct falsification of the existing scientific data. It's shocking, and I think that man has rendered himself absolutely unfit to be running for office.
Okay, because you haven't joined the religious cult.
Well, how do you argue with that, though? It'll cause any kind of weather.
That's right, exactly.
Anything could happen.
Yeah.
If nothing happens, it's climate change. If it gets really crazy cold or crazy hot, it's climate change. Big storms, little storms, climate change. You can't argue with it.
That's right. No rain, it's climate change. Big storms, climate change. Hot, cold, everything that happens every day somewhere is caused. And Brown is a nut. He makes all kinds of crazy assertions, never backs it up with any detail other than to point at all the scientific buffoons who have a computer model and nothing else. All they have is a computer model. And you keep pointing out every year, all the time, that their predictions were wrong. The North Pole didn't melt. Greenland didn't melt. We haven't had any significant hurricanes hit the United States in 10 years now. We have not had huge fire seasons in 10 years now. We have not had huge tornado seasons for 10 years. All this apocalyptic stuff that really peaked about 10 years ago, none of it happened. They claimed that kids were going to grow up on the East Coast never seeing snow. And it's all on the record. It's all on audio and video and in print. They made a whole bunch of crazy, wacky predictions. Remember, what was the crazy thing? Like, I think, was it like the snow in the Himalayas or something was all going to disappear? I mean, it's just, all right. So I found over the weekend this article written by Patrick Moore. Patrick Moore co-founded Greenpeace. Okay, so he's not an oil executive. Co-founded Greenpeace. And he has been a leader in international environmentalism for more than 40 years. And he wrote this piece for a magazine, heartlander.org. And it's entitled, Why I'm a Climate Change Skeptic. And here's a few of the things he says. Now listen to this carefully, because Jerry Brown makes assertions, but he doesn't engage in debate, and he doesn't offer any facts.
No, he's just parroting the arguments.
Patrick Moore writes, I'm skeptical humans are the main cause of climate change, and that it will be catastrophic. There's no scientific proof of this hypothesis, yet we are told the debate is over and the science is settled. My skepticism begins with the believer's certainty that they can predict the global climate with a computer model. The Earth has been warming very gradually for 300 years, since the Little Ice Age ended, long before the heavy use of fossil fuels. And prior to the Little Ice Age, during the medieval warm period, Vikings colonized Greenland and Newfoundland when it was warmer there then than it is today. During Roman times, it was warmer long before fossil fuels revolutionized civilization. And then the idea that it would be catastrophic if carbon dioxide were to increase and average global temperatures were to rise, it's preposterous. Because what he says is carbon dioxide has actually dropped over the last 150 million years. It used to be 300 parts per million, and then it went down to 280 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution. And since then, it's at 400 parts per million. And he says at 400 parts per million, all our food crops, forests, and natural ecosystems are still on a starvation diet for carbon dioxide. The optimum level for carbon dioxide for plant growth is about 1,500 parts per million, 4 times higher than today.
Oh, then we got to get going.
He says greenhouse growers inject carbon dioxide to increase yields. Farms and forests would produce more if carbon dioxide kept rising. We have no proof that increased carbon dioxide is responsible for the Earth's slight warming for the past 300 years. There's been no significant warming for 18 years, while we have emitted 25% of all the carbon dioxide ever emitted. That's really important point. A quarter of all the carbon dioxide ever emitted in the history of the United States has been emitted in the last 18 years, and there's been no warming. Carbon dioxide is vital for life on Earth, and the plants would like more of it.
Yeah, in fact, a couple of weeks ago, the researchers decided to put out an argument as to why the rise in temperatures has stagnated over the last 10 to 15 years, a point that you've brought up many times in the show. Since the late 90s, the pace of global temperature rise has slowed. And now they're saying it's the usual confusing conglomerate argument about variations in seawater temperatures in the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean, along with currents and wind patterns and blah, 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 blah.
And
it's just a hiatus, okay?
And it's
coming back if we don't do something.
And they always say, well, we didn't know that the ocean currents did this, and we didn't know the wind currents did that, and we didn't know that the ocean affected the wind currents this way. It's like, we didn't know, and you're right. That's the whole point. You don't know.
There's a lot
you
we
don't know.
This whole thing is a lot bigger than all of us, and it's been around a lot longer.
And
I like the way he pointed out, too, the Greenpeace guy you mentioned, that it's an odorless, tasteless, non-toxic thing, carbon dioxide. We've turned it into a pollutant.
He said the only way to reduce carbon dioxide emissions to zero, which is what the UN wants, was you have to reduce the population to zero, or go back 10,000 years before we started clearing forests for agriculture. Yeah. So, you know what? It's stupid insanity. It's been insanity now for 18 freaking years. There has been no warning. We've put out 25% of all the carbon dioxide in those 18 years. It's not happening. Jerry Brown is a nut. He's just a nut. And if Chuck Todd had any brains in his head, maybe somebody would watch the show. If he started quoting Patrick Moore, again, co-founder of Greenpeace, and say, Jerry, why don't you respond to this instead of making your silly assertions?